It sounds preposterous, and it is. Why would Christianity establish a Bible that many believe is the Word of God and then discourage Christians from owning or reading it? The proposal for a sanctioned Bible was first raised at the Council of Nicaea, called by the Emperor Constantine in 325 Common Era, to establish a unified Catholic Church. At that point, no universally sanctioned scriptures or Christian Bible existed. There were numerous Christian sects at the time, and various churches and officials adopted different texts and gospels. That's why the Council of Hippo sanctioned 27 books for the New Testament in 393 Common Era. 4 years later, the Council of Carthage confirmed the same 27 books as the authoritative scriptures of the Church, that is commonly known as the New Testament. Wouldn't you assume that the newly established Church would want its devotees to immerse themselves in the sanctioned New Testament? Especially since the Church went to great lengths to eliminate competing gospels. And wouldn't the best way of spreading the good news be to ensure that every Christian had direct access to the Bible? But that's not what happened. The Church actually discouraged the populace from reading the Bible on their own, a policy that intensified through the Middle Ages and later, with the addition of a prohibition forbidding translation of the Bible into native languages. Yet a different model already existed in Judaism. Dating back to the Exodus, Moses ordained public readings of the Torah, according to Jewish Roman historian Flavius Josephus. Here's a quote. "Every week men should desert their other occupations and assemble to listen to the Torah and to obtain a thorough and accurate knowledge." That practice later became standard in synagogue services and continues today, in which the Old Testament, the Torah, is read over a year in sequence, covering the entire Bible. In fact, as a practicing Jew, Jesus read the weekly Parsha. That's the section of the Torah that is read every week, called the Parsha. And he read it at the Sabbath services that he regularly attended. Here's what Luke 4:16 states. "And he, Jesus, went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up for the read." Since the Church sequestering their sanctioned Bible from the populace makes no sense, I was not surprised that some readers bristled when I recently wrote about the historic prohibitions against Christians reading the New Testament on their own, or worse, translating the Bible into a native language. One called me a liar. That, too, was not surprising. A decade earlier, I gave a talk at an American Psychological Association meeting, and afterwards lunched with a group of young Christians, some of whom also challenged my statements about the Bible prohibitions. I later sent them references documenting my claims, but never heard back from them. I've always wondered how they reacted to the citations I sent, which included the decree of the Council of Toulouse, 1229 Common Era, and here's a quote. "We prohibit also that the laity should be permitted to have the books of the Old or New Testament, but we most strictly forbid their having any translation of these books." Then the ruling of the Council of Tarragona of 1234 Common Era, quote, "No one may possess the books of the Old and New Testaments in the Romance languages, and if anyone possesses them, he must turn them over to the local bishop within 8 days after promulgation of this decree, so that they may be burned." Then the proclamations of the Ecumenical Council of Constance in 1415 Common Era. Oxford professor and theologian John Wycliffe was the first in 1380 Common Era to translate the New Testament into English, to, as Wycliffe stated, and here's Wycliffe's quote, "helpeth Christian men to study the gospel in that tongue in which they know best Christ's sentence." That makes a lot of sense. If you want people to read something, put it in a language that they can read and understand. For this heresy, Wycliffe was posthumously condemned by Tyndale, the Archbishop of Canterbury. And here's what was said about Wycliffe. Wycliffe's bones were exhumed and publicly burned, and the ashes were thrown into the swift river. Then there's the fate of William Tyndale. In 1536, William Tyndale was burned at the stake for translating the Bible into English. And not because it was a bad translation. In fact, at least 60% of today's King James Version, that is, King James edition of the Bible, is Tyndale's translation. According to Tyndale, the Church forbid owning or reading the Bible to control and restrict the teachings and to enhance their own power and importance. While I was writing my book, Jesus Uncensored, Restoring the Authentic Jew, it became increasingly clear to me that there was another potent motive for keeping the New Testament out of reach for Christians: to conceal the Jewish foundation of Christianity and Jesus' lifelong dedication to Judaism and Jewish practices. Would the newly established church want converts to know that Christianity began as a Jewish sect and that Jesus was a thoroughly dedicated practicing Jew who never suggested the launch of a new religion? Would the church want it revealed that Jesus lived and died a dedicated Jew, as observed by Christian writer Jean Guiton in his book Great Heresies and Church Councils? And here's a quote from Guiton. Jesus did not mean to found a new religion. In his historical humanity, Jesus was a devout Israelite, practicing the law to the full, from circumcision to Pesach, paying the half shekel for the temple in Jerusalem, the capital of his nation, was the city he loved. Jesus wept over it. Jesus had spiritually realized the germinal aspiration of his people, which was to raise the God of Israel. Wouldn't church officials also want to conceal that the disciples of Jesus, led by James, Jesus' brother, and Peter, continued to maintain their Jewish identities, but made Rabbi Jesus the centerpiece of their Jewish practices, and that is clearly indicated in Acts of the Apostles in the New Testament. Later, Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles, initiated a rift between his brand of Jewish Christianity and the teachings of the Jerusalem-based disciples of Jesus. That divide eventually drifted toward increasing separation of Christianity and Judaism. But Jewish converts to the new Jewish Christianity continued to worship in synagogues, a practice that was still proliferating as late as the 4th century. The vicious homilies against the Jews by St. John of Chrysostom, late in the 4th century, 386 to 387 Common Era, make that clear. Why would the former bishop of Antioch and later bishop of Constantinople spend so much time and energy excoriating Christians for continuing to attend synagogues and continuing to participate in Jewish practices and holy days? Obviously, those were widespread practices if the leading church official got riled up about them. The church was clearly stepping up its attack on Judaism to enhance and expedite a total break with Judaism. To accelerate that process, the charge of Christ killers against Jews was stepped up as well. Then the blood libels, the accusation that Jews ritually murdered Christian children to extract blood for religious practices, further intensified attacks against the Jews. But there was still that pesky New Testament, a thoroughly Jewish document, as Anglican priest Bruce Chilton has noted. He put it this way: "It became clear to me that everything Jesus did was as a Jew, for Jews, and about Jews." If Christians had had access to the Bible in its entirety, not only the limited portions that the clergy presented, they might have noticed what leaped out to me. The word Jew appears 202 times in the New Testament, with 82 of these mentions in the Gospels. The term Christian never appears in the Gospels at all, for the obvious reason that there was no Christianity during the life of Jesus, only Judaism, in which he and his family, disciples, and followers were immersed. Readers of the Gospels might also have noted that when Jesus wasn't addressing the multitudes of Jews, all those multitudes of followers were Jews. He was teaching in synagogues and was attending Jewish holy day celebrations, and his disciples called him Rabbi. And this isn't spin, I'm not making it up, it's all right there in the New Testament, the Christian Bible. Since the gospel writers couldn't keep Judaism out of Jesus' life story and ministry, without the Judaism there would be no story and no followers. So the church invoked the ban on the Bible while Christianizing Jesus with selected and edited stories that they conveyed to the public. The Christianizing process, along with erasing Jesus' Jewish identity, continued throughout the medieval and Renaissance periods. It is dramatically illustrated in artworks in which Jesus, his family, and close followers show no trace of a connection to Judaism. In this ethnic cleansing of Judaism, they are pictured as fair-skinned Northern Europeans living in palatial Romanesque settings surrounded by medieval and Renaissance Christian saints and Christian artifacts and practices. Images completely alien to their actual Jewish lives in a rural village in Galilee. You can learn more about that in my YouTube video, Why Have Art Historians Been Silent About the Falsification of Biblical History in Artworks? But today, in a new era of reconciliation, Christians and Jews are recognizing the strong connection between the two religions. Some Christians are even adopting Jewish practices like the Passover Seder and the Jewish marriage ceremony under the chuppah, that is, the canopy, and couples are signing the ancient Jewish ketubah, that's the marriage contract. Others are visiting synagogues. All of this in the desire to relive the actual experiences of Jesus. Several years ago, 170 Jewish scholars and leaders from all four branches of Judaism issued a statement calling on Jews to relinquish their fear and mistrust of Christianity and to acknowledge church efforts in the decades since the Holocaust to amend Christian teaching about Judaism, end quote. Christians are increasingly recognizing the Jewish roots of Christianity, or as Pope Francis recently said, a Christian cannot be anti-Semitic. His roots are Jewish. When Timothy Dolan returned from the Vatican after his elevation to cardinal in 2012, he appeared on the popular TV show The View. Barbara Walters, one of the hosts, playfully said to the affable cardinal, "I'm crazy about you. I'm thinking of converting. Do you take Jewish girls?" Dolan responded, "My favorite girl of all time was Jewish." "Who is that?" Walter asked with a surprised look. "Mary," Cardinal Dolan answered softly with a smile. His casual remarks suggest that the celebration of common ground can trump doctrinal differences. Let's celebrate that view. The art exhibit that I'm organizing, Putting Judaism Back in the Picture, toward healing the Christian-Jewish divide, aims to tell the two sides of the Jesus story. Jesus, the dedicated Jew, and Jesus, whose life and teachings inspired a new religion. For more information, visit the exhibit website www.jewishjesusart.com. That's www.jewishjesusart.com. Thanks for listening. I'm Dr. Bernard Starr.